We're going to be in Job this morning, chapter 28. Job chapter 28. We'll read one verse here, verse 20, and then we will look at what Job's got to say to us here. Job 28, verse 20. It says, "Whence then cometh wisdom, and where is the place of understanding?" I ask a lot of times, what are we looking for? And that's what I asked about our message this morning. What are we looking for? Here, if we look at this chapter, Job here is talking about the search. In verse 12, he says, "But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding?" So we're having a search here, and Job's talking about that search. Now you think about the place that we're at in the book of Job. Job has been having a conversation with his friends. They've been going back and forth for several chapters here. His friends are condemning Job because they feel like he's got sin in his life. They feel like they know exactly what's going on. They feel like they have the wisdom to be able to determine that Job has some sort of sin in his life. And Job has been defending himself, and we get to this chapter here, and he begins to ask them about that wisdom. You know, where do you think you come up with this at? Basically is what he's saying to them. How do you think you come around to that? So we begin with this question, where does wisdom come from? Where is it? Where do we find it? Why should we even look for it if you want to go that far? So Job's friends here, as I said, thought they had found it. They thought they knew those things. And we sometimes in our life feel like we found it, don't we? We feel like we have the answers to life's questions. We feel like we have the direction in our lives that we need to take us in the path that we desire to go. But a lot of time we're looking in the wrong places, aren't we? We're looking in the wrong places as we go through life. Job here, as he's talking about these things to his friends, he tells us, or he helps us to understand, that a lot of times we look in the wrong places. In verse 1, he says, "We look in the deep of the earth, but we can't find it." In verse 4, he says, "We open shafts in a valley away from where anyone lives. They are forgotten by travelers. They hang in the air, far away from mankind. They swing to and fro." And here again, he's talking about we look deep in the earth. We dig these shafts, and people climb down on ropes and swing back and forth down into these shafts, trying to find that whatever they're looking for here. In verse 5 it says, "As for the earth, out of it comes bread, but underneath it is turned up by fire." In verse 6 it says, "Its stones are the place of sapphires, and it has dust of gold." In verse 7 it says, "That path no bird of prey knows, and the falcon's eyes have not seen it." Verse 8, "The proud beasts have not trodden it, and the lions have not passed over it." Verse 9, "Man puts his hand on the flinty stone and overturns mountains by the roots. He cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eyes sees every precious thing." He says we look everywhere. We look in the deep. We dig deep in the ground. We dig shafts. We make tunnels through mountains. We do all those things. We search for the precious stones. We search for the things that this world says are precious, and all those different things. He says the birds have not seen it. And some of these birds have good eyesight. They've never seen wisdom on this earth. He talks about all those things. He says we search and we search and we search, and we put forth great effort to find the things that we think are treasure, but we never find wisdom. We never find wisdom. I read a story as I was studying this week about a college student. He was on the football team, and at this college they had a Bible class. New Testament theories is what it was, and it said that was always the A class, the easy class, because the professor never gave a test. Through the whole semester, he never gave a test. never gave any homework. There was nothing ever for him to do. For the last 25 years, at the end of the semester, he gave one test and it had one question on it. And it said, tell us about the adventures of Paul, or tell us about where Paul went and delivered the gospel. That was the only question on there. Well, this guy who played football there, they called him Meathead, he took this class. And he got somebody to help him. And all through the semester, he studied about those places where Paul went, the places where he took the gospel, all the things that went on. They came to the finals there in that semester. They were sitting in there, and the teacher handed out all the questions, all the tests. And as they opened up the book, you heard a great sigh throughout the whole class there. As I said, for the past 25 years, it had been the exact same question on that test. And this year, he changed the question. He said, critique the message from Jesus on the Mount of Olives. Everybody in there sighed and thought, oh no, how are we ever going to do this? And a lot of them, as they sat there and thought, they couldn't think of how to do it. So they closed up their tests and turned them in. But this young man here sat back there in the back, and he sat for a few minutes, and then in a minute it says that they said that he started writing. An hour passed, he is still writing. 2 hours passed, he is still writing. The third hour come about, he is still writing. He finally finished up his test and he handed it in. And at the end of the day, the teacher went through, the professor went through and looked through them, and he had a big old stack over here, and all those were F's. They were incomplete. He had one over here that had an A on it. And guess whose it was? And they asked him, they said, what in the world did he write about for 3 hours? How did he know what to do? And the professor grinned and opened up his page, and it said, who am I to critique the Son of God's message on the mountain? Let me tell you about Paul's adventures. So he had wrote out all the adventures of Paul for that 3 hours. He'd come across some wisdom in that semester of class there. He had learned some things. So we search a lot of times, but we never find those things. We never find what we're looking for. So why can't we find it? Why can't we find this wisdom? Why can't we find what we're looking for? In verse 13 of chapter 28, it says, man knoweth not the price thereof. You see, a lot of times I think we can't find it because we don't know how much it's worth, what kind of value it has, so we don't look for it, do we? We don't look for it a lot of times. We look, as I said, as Job mentioned here, we look for gold and silver and precious jewels and compounds out of the earth and all different things, but we don't look for wisdom because we don't understand its worth. In verse 16, Job says, it cannot be valued with the gold of Ophir, with the precious onyx or the sapphire. The gold and the crystal cannot equal it, and the exchange of it shall not be for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral and of pearls, for the price of wisdom is above rubies. The topaz of the Ethiopian shall not equal it, neither shall it be valued with pure gold. We don't understand what the value of wisdom is. We don't understand what it does for us and what it's worth in our lives, and therefore we don't chase after it, do we? We don't seek it. We don't look for it. Now you might say, preacher, well, what about all these different universities and all these different things? Well, that's different. They're seeking knowledge. Knowledge is different from wisdom. You know, there's a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge, but they don't have wisdom. Some of the wisest people I've ever met had very little what you would call schooling. They didn't go to school but just for a few grades, and then went into the life of hard knocks, the school of hard knocks, we can say. So we don't understand how much value it has. So the question is, do we pursue wisdom? Do we pursue it in our own lives? Do we seek after it? Do we try to find it in our own lives? The other reason we don't find it, or the other reason we don't look for it, I think, a lot of times, is in verse 11. He says, He bindeth the floods from overflowing, and the thing that is hid bringeth He forth to light. Job here is talking about wisdom being hidden there. He's talking about that wisdom being hid, and we can't bring it forth into the light. That's something that we can't find. You know, we can search on and under every mountain. We can make tunnels through them. We can search as far as our rockets will travel in today's modern world. But we will never find wisdom. We'll never find it. We can't find it. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 7, it says, But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory. So the Bible here tells us that wisdom is hidden, right? It's hidden. And we have to seek it from the one that has it to find it. How often do we chase after that? How often do we look for it in that manner? You know, we look at all these places, I said, over and under and as far as a rocket will fly, still no wisdom because it's secret. It's in a secret place. It's in that place that we fail to look a lot of times. So here as we get down to verse 20, Job here again is asking, you know, he does this in 3 sections in this chapter. The first one ends there in verse 12 where he asks, Where shall wisdom be found? In verse 20 he says, Whence then cometh wisdom, and where is the place of understanding? So he's asking, where does it come from? Where does wisdom come from? If we cannot find it here, then where? You see, wisdom belongs to God. In verse 23, it says, God understandeth the way thereof, and He knoweth the place thereof. And then he goes on through there and he asks him, he said, do you understand how God has made the moisture in the air just the right percentage? Do you understand how God has made the rain? Do you understand how God has made the thunder? You see those things, but do we understand them? Do we have the wisdom to understand those things, to create those things? Everything we see in His creation is ordered perfectly, isn't it? So wisdom belongs to God. Wisdom belongs to God. We see a sovereign God in control of all the activities and all the circumstance in this world. Everything that goes on. You know, here is Job is going through this chapter and he's asking these men this. He comes to a conclusion in his own life. He begins to understand that God is sovereign and that everything that has happened to him is because God has allowed it to happen. No matter what it was. Go back to verse 1 of the chapter 1 and we see all the wealth and the very few verses there. We see all the wealth and all the things that God had given Job. He understood that came from God. And here he's beginning to understand everything that's going on in his life since is because God has allowed those things. And he even says, you know, sometimes you see wicked people who are prospering. God allowed that. You see righteous people who are suffering. God allowed that. He began to understand just exactly who this God is that he served. He sees the sovereign God in control of all the activities and circumstances of life. His friends felt like Job had sinned. You know, they pointed that finger and they wagged that tongue at him for several chapters trying to convince him that he had done something wrong. And as we go on in Job, we see God call them out for it. You didn't speak what you needed to speak, is what he'll tell them. But we don't look sometimes where we need to, do we? Job here, as he's talking to his friends about how did you come up with these answers, He figures it out in his own life where those answers come from. In verse 28 there it says, "And unto man he said, Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding." You see, as he sought this wise and sovereign God, he come up with the answer. He says, the fear of the Lord, that's wisdom. You know, sometimes we live our lives in this world without any fear of God, don't we? And you see that a lot of times in the world that's around us. You see people kind of thumb their nose at God and say, I don't need you, I don't want you, I have no concern or care for you. And there's probably at some point been that mindset in our own lives. I know it has mine. I don't need you, I don't want you, I have no concern for you. That was a mindset. And we see that in the world that we live. Job here realized that true wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. And when I came to know the Lord, I began to understand all that I didn't know. And there was a lot of things that I didn't know. At that point in time, I probably felt like I knew most everything, but I began to learn all those things I didn't know. So are we seeking that wise and sovereign God who sees and knows and controls all? Job here says that the fear of the Lord, that's wisdom. Have we come to ourselves and realized that we fear the Lord, that we seek the Lord, that we strive after the Lord? You know, I realize in my life that I'm not that smart. I have some general knowledge about the things of this world. You know, I can read and write, do a little bit of arithmetic. You know, that's the knowledge that this world teaches us. Those things that are there. I have an ability with my hands. I can take things apart and put things back together. And when I get done, they work. You know, a lot of people can take things apart and put them back together, but they never work. I can take them apart and put them back together, and they actually work. You know, God's given me that knowledge. But a lot of times in my life, I have forgotten to seek God's wisdom. In my own life for the past several years, I have prayed that God would give me wisdom for the situations I face throughout that day. See, knowledge and wisdom is a lot different. I might come into a situation and I might have knowledge of the things that are going on and the things that are happening at that point in time, but that doesn't tell me how I need to respond. That knowledge doesn't. That knowledge doesn't tell me how I need to interact if it's with a person or things of this nature. That knowledge doesn't tell me all the things that need to go on. And a lot of times we interact and we do things or say things that probably cause as much harm or more harm than if we'd just kept our mouth shut, right? But you see, God can give us that knowledge to help us when we come to that point. To know what to say or what not to say. Or whether to say anything at all. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I still don't forget sometimes, but I try every day to pray that God will give me wisdom for the situations I face throughout that day. And I try every day to thank Him for that He has given me throughout the day when I lay my head down at night. Because I've learned that it's so easy to become a stumbling block. I've learned that it's so easy to turn somebody away from God instead of drawing somebody toward God because of the things that we say or the things that we do in our own lives. We have to be careful. We have to be careful about what we say. Because sometimes we may say something that is totally innocent and completely correct and honest, and yet it turns somebody away from God. One of these days I'll give account for those things. When I stand before God, I don't want to have to stand there and hold my head down and say, Lord, I'm sorry because I didn't listen. I didn't seek your wisdom. I didn't seek your guidance in my daily life. I did these things out of my own knowledge. And because of that, I turned things away from you. See, Job began to understand that the fear of God, that's wisdom. And when we begin to depart from that evil that's in this world, that's understanding. You see, we have to seek that wisdom of God, and we have to turn our backs on the things that this world says we should desire, that we should seek after, that we should all have. Now, those things that Job mentioned that we seek after, a lot of those things are not inherently evil. Gold's not evil. If somebody laid a gold chain right there on the corner of that table, I wouldn't be afraid of it. I don't think that chain would be evil. I don't have to worry about that chain jumping up and grabbing me and choking me and dragging me around the building and all those. I don't have to worry about that. That material that it's made out of is not evil. But if I love after it, I chase after it, I desire it, that's all that I ever want and all I ever go after, then it has become evil in my life. See, he's talked about these things. They're not inherently evil, but we can use them that way, can't we? We can turn them that way in our own lives. And only when we begin to understand that there's one thing in this world that we should desire more than life itself, and that's God. Only then do we begin to understand where that wisdom and that understanding comes from. So I have to ask you this morning, have you begun to pursue that wisdom? Have you begun to desire that wisdom? Have you begun to seek that wisdom in your own lives? Because only then do we come to understand who God is. Do you understand who God is? Do you have that desire in your life to chase Him no matter where you have to go? To the ends of this earth? Are you seeking that wisdom that only God can give? If you would, stand with me this morning.